Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We are happy to welcome you on our webinar about legislative developments in Russia for the preceding year. I may say, the traditional one. We have been doing it for a couple of years, and we noticed that we do this at the same day on the 1st of February, so probably we may call it a good tradition. My name is Vsevolod Tyupa. I am the head of Life Science Practice Group at Seamless Legal. I am here with Ivan Zaraiskiy, who is associate of the Life Science Practice Group. And at the next 45 minutes, we will be together with you discussing the main legislative agenda in Russia for the 2023. Unlike 2022, in this year, it was not so simple to select the first topic for discussion. Probably it's a good news because comparing to 2022, the agenda, the political environment in Russia was not so dramatic. So there have been a lot of legal developments which are driven not by negative political environment, but by purely legal needs. But still, nevertheless, we decided to start with the topic deficiency in certain goods in pharmaceutical and medical devices. We know that the statistics is not always 100% relevant, but still, according to the RBC News, which is a news agency in Russia, quite well known and well reputable, the assortment of drugs in Russian pharmacies in 2023 has been reduced by 11%. There are some other statistics data which are more or less confirming the same, that to a certain extent, probably not too much, but still, the deficiency of pharmaceuticals and medical devices indeed exists. That's obviously driving Russian government to take certain measures to combat this deficiency. Let's start with the measures intended to combat deficiency in pharmaceuticals. There are three main measures to do so. Fast-track registration of therapeutic analogies. Until the end of 2024, it is possible to register on a temporary basis an analog of a shortage drug under the special fast-track procedure, which is much faster, much more streamlined than ordinary authorization procedure. A marketing authorization issued under this special procedure, initially valid until the end of 2024, but subject to provision of pharmacovigilance data, may be extended until the end of 2025. Then it is still possible to import certain drugs in foreign packages. To do so, the specific batch of the drug in a foreign package may be imported into Russia if there is a decision of the Commission confirming, a special governmental commission confirming that such a packaging may be imported, there is a confirming the efficacy of this drug, and all the information which is presented in non-Russian language is duplicated in Russia in a special way. First, there is a sticker, there must be a sticker on the secondary packaging with the necessary information in Russia. And second, the SMPC must be duplicated in Russian language. As a year ago, it is still possible to circulate certain categories of unregistered drugs subject to following conditions. First, there must be an analog under international non-proprietary name has been already registered in Russia. This drug must be authorized for medical use in another country outside of Russia, and the special permission of the Ministry of Health is obtained. Then, once these conditions are met, again, the lack of Russian language information must be cured by a special sticker put on the secondary packaging, and the information in the CMPC must be translated and duplicated in Russia. The special measures to combat the efficacy of medical devices. Also, there is a fast-track registration for the missing medical devices included in the special list administered by a special governmental commission, which comprises of representatives of several Russian ministries, including Ministry of Health or Federal Anti-Monopoly Services. The procedure is it's very streamlined compared to standard authorization procedure. Technically, it should be within actual 22 business days, around a month. And a marketing authorization issued under this procedure is valid until the 1st of January 2025. Another measure which is very important for the companies operating on the medical device market, Russian government has allowed using non-original companies and accessories for medical equipment. What is the reason for this special permission? Obviously, the sanctions against Russia introduced by Western countries. Because according to the sanctions legislations, medical devices are traditionally subject to a so-called humanitarian exemption. Under this exemption, there are three categories of products, which are pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and agriculture products, which are not subject to sanction restrictions and must be allowed into a country under sanctions, irrespectively of the level of sanctions. But speaking about medical device, such a humanitarian exemption is only applicable to the finished medical device, to the final products. For example, certain kind of medical equipment. But obviously, for a dual operation of medical equipment, it must be provided with necessary components, accessories, and other additional things, which in turn has another customs code, and in the vast majority of cases are under sanctions restrictions. So, simply speaking, an importer from Russia is allowed to import final medical devices, being under humanitarian exemption, but not able or has to go through a very complicated procedure of obtaining an export license in the country of origin accessory to import necessary accessories and components. And this measure allows using non-original components and accessories produced by other manufacturers which are available here in Russia to continue utilizing certain medical equipment. And another measure which is very specific and concerns not the full market, but still very important to be mentioned. In 2023, the compulsory license institute has been reactivated in Russia. The first precedent of issuing a compulsory license was back at the end of 2020 for remdesivir medicine, and for a long time it remained a single precedent of issuing a compulsory license. At the beginning of 2022, after the start of international crisis around Russia-Ukrainian situation, Russian authorities articulated, mainly addressing the companies intended to leave Russia, that they retain a right to issue a compulsory license for a local production of a medicine or medical devices which is under deficiency in Russia. But during the whole very difficult 2022 year, no compulsory license will grant. And there was an idea, maybe Russian officials, Russian government will not come back to this very specific and very sensitive, very disputable from a reputational standpoint institution. But actually the answer is no. Russian government indeed returned to this institution and granted a compulsory license to one of the products of Novo Nordisk called Ozempic with API semaglutide. The license is issued for 1 year, and the Novo Nordisk even will not receive even a very modest compensation guaranteed by Russian law, which is which is actually very low, 0.5% from the turnover sold in Russia, but this compensation is due only to patent holders originating from friendly countries. Given that Novo Nordisk is based in Denmark, which is deemed a non-friendly country for Russia, then there is a special rule that the patent holders from non-friendly countries are not allowed to receive any remuneration for the compulsory license. So, you know, the essence of the compulsory license is that the Russian government allows a local manufacturer to produce a product protected by patent without the consent of the patent holder. This institution exists in Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and some other countries. And as I said, it's quite disputable. So, again, probably the risk of being affected by compulsory license is actually quite low, because even as of today, there are only 2 multi-international pharmaceutical manufacturers who are affected by this, but we need to mention that it still exists. Then a few novelties in the state control procedure. Of course, we are not intent to discuss all the measures of the public control in Russia, which is a huge scope for discussion, only the news introduced in 2023. There are additional risk indicators applicable to the manufacturers of drugs and medical devices. The risk indicators mean that if at least one of such indicators is detected, then a company may be subject to an unscheduled audit, simply speaking, downgrade. For pharmaceutical manufacturers, these indicators is that 3 or more withdrawals of any series or batches of a drug which shows non-compliance with quality requirements, or switching to the batch testing from the selective tests. For medical devices, it could be even a significant increase of clinical trials in a medical institution twice or more, or receipt of an application for a license for the maintenance of medical devices, information that the equipment is used by a licensee from another region, or the premises are used by another licensee who has not declared a change of address, and that certain medical institution uses for licensing process a name of the employee or the specialist who simultaneously employed in another medical institution in another region of Russia. So obviously there is a mark of fraudulence in such procedure when a medical institution, when a company submits for a license, it shows an employee, which is a mandatory license requirement. It shows employee with necessary qualification, but it is obviously that this employee is working in 3 or 4 or more another licensees. Sorry, I'm trying to switch the go. Okay. And another measure of the state control, which is quite new for Russia, is the so-called preventive visits. This measure was started to be actively used by the Russian healthcare authorities, specific in 2023. A preventive visit is a very specific measure of the state control, which is very different from so unfriendly measures like unscheduled audit or down rate or something else. In this case, unlike down rate or unscheduled audit, this is, let's say, a friendly discussion, a friendly dialogue between a representative of the healthcare authority and management of the company in the company's office. When such visit is requested for, it is requested if the healthcare authority receives an information that a company operating in Russia probably, supposedly violates certain requirements. When the authority issues a special warning letter addressed to that company saying that, please be kindly informed that it is not allowed, it is prohibited to be in non-compliance with Russian requirements, and we kindly suggest you for one of our officers to come into your office and to have like a friendly discussion of the current situation, and probably we can give you certain recommendations. It should be noted that such a discussion indeed a quite safe measure for a company. There are no penalties, no mandatory prescriptions, no other negative sanctions that could be imposed for a company agreed to such visit, except for the very specific exception, which you may read at the end of the slide. But as a general rule, no negative consequences. But even if a company doesn't want to agree on such a visit, it retains a right to reject it. So this right is granted by law and doesn't lead to any negative consequences. So it remains to the company's decision. The only requirement is that the company must, or at least should, respond in a written form to such request. So if you don't agree for such a preventive visit, you should write a responsive paper with any reason you can imagine, like top management is very busy in the suggested days, so it is not possible for us to agree on this visit. And that's it, without negative consequences. And a few words about probably one of the most problematic, most difficult topics for the business in Russia, importation and exportation issues in relation with unfriendly countries. Obviously, the most difficult topic is the importation of the goods being under sanctions regime into Russia. As you know, the sanctions regimes against Russia assumes that, speaking very roughly, the goods are divided into three, let's call it by certain colors, categories. Green list, the products which are allowed to be supplied into Russia, notwithstanding of any sanctions. These are, as I said, pharmaceuticals, finished medical devices, agriculture products, which are under humanitarian exemptions. There is a red list, that's the goods which are fully prohibited from being supplied into Russia, being under the most tight sanctions regime. And the intermediate regime, like orange list, these are the products which theoretically may be supplied into Russia, subject to a special approval of the export agency of in the country. How this approval is to be granted? There are very detailed rules and procedures described in the sanctions legislation, which are, in a nutshell, goes to the two basic rules. The product must not be able to be used for military service, and the final recipient of that product must not be somehow linked to the Russian military. So it's called a non-military user. Actually, the procedure of checking this information varies from country to country, but the common rule that it's very difficult and in the most cases non-transparent. Their permission may be granted or may not be granted with a hardly predictable outcome, with a significant delay. Specifically, as a matter of example, from the feedback of our clients, colleagues from the industry, it is very difficult to work with the German export agency called BAFA. So the terms for issuance of an export license are delayed very often, and the result is really hardly predictable when a company applies for such a license, even providing all the documents, all the information confirming non-military use of the product they have. it is still not a guarantee that an export license will be granted. It still can be declined. Comparing to German, the feedback is that the United States regulator works much better. It is even possible to receive a track number or certain tracking indicator, allowing an applicant to look how his application goes through the procedure. But still, obviously, the positive outcome is not guaranteed, and it should not surprise, of course, because this procedure is not for granting these permissions to anyone who applies for this. The rule of the sanctions, the general rule, is not to grant such a license if there is at least a minor risk to finance, to support Russian military. So it's understandable, but it's very, very difficult for the companies in Russia operating on medical device, pharmaceuticals, and other life science markets, very difficult to obtain even such products that they do need and do not intend to use somehow connected with the Russian military. By the way, as a quite rare but positive example from my personal experience, during 2023, we discovered that a Polish regulator issues such an export permissions quite fastly and operatively. It was a bit surprising considering very difficult political environment between Russia and Poland, but surprisingly the process gone very smoothly. And in turn, probably there are certain like say mirror measures adopted by the Russian government intended to restrict the export of certain equipment. There are 3 governmental resolutions which have in numbers 1 by 1, 311 and 12 and 13. In the nutshell, the essence is there is a list of certain equipment, including certain items of medical and laboratory equipment, which is prohibited to be exported outside of Russia, subject to a very limited number of exceptions. There is a general exception that it is possible to export into another country of the Eurasian Union comprising of Russia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Belarus. And only the export into Belarus doesn't require a special permission and can be done on a free basis. The export into Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan requires a special authorization of the Russian government. Why it is important? Because it makes very difficult, for example, a technical maintenance or repairing procedure which might be required for certain equipment, and there is no capabilities to do so locally in Russia. The export into a non-friendly country for such purposes is not allowed due to these restrictions. So probably that's it for the first part of our discussion. Now I'm giving the floor to my colleague, Ivan Zaraiskiy. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vsevolod. Dear colleagues, further we will discuss the prolongation and the planned update of national registration of medical devices, and we'll discuss some other important legislative developments as well. As someone may know, the regulation of medical devices has 2 levels. The first one is the national level, namely the legal acts adopted by the Russian Federation, and the supranational level, the regulations and laws of the Eurasian Economic Union, of which Russia is one of the members, along with Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. To date, the rules of Eurasian Economic Union incrementally supersede the Russian regulations on medical devices, especially in part of medical device registration. And initially, the registration under the Eurasian Economic Union rules was supposed to completely replace the national registration procedure in January 2022. However, after this deadline, it occurred that many companies are not ready for registration under new rules. They face many difficulties in this process. So, as a result, only several dozens of medical devices received the marketing authorization under Eurasian Economic Union regulations. In response to this situation, the regulator has prolonged the Russian registration procedure several times, and for the last time, the deadline for application under the registration through national procedure has been moved in February 2023. As of today, it is possible to register the medical device either under local Russian registration procedure or under Eurasian Economic Union rules, and this opportunity will remain at least until the end of 2025. And since the local procedure remains open, it is planned to update the respective rules of registration. One of the most important updates to be introduced is the fast-track registration for local or domestic medical devices. Notably, this is the first time when the Russian law describes the concept of domestic or local medical device, and such device shall meet 3 criteria. First, the manufacturer is a Russian resident and the manufacturing site is located in Russia. Second, technical and toxicological tests are made in institute, namely in All Russia Research and Testing Institute of Medical Technology. And the last one, clinical trials are conducted in the medical organization authorized by the Ministry of Health. The procedure is comprised of several stages and starts with the tests and trials to be conducted by the company. Once they are completed, the company files an application for expertise to the institute. The institute reviews the application within 25 business days and renders the opinion on whether the registration is possible. This opinion is transferred to the healthcare authority, and the authority accepts the opinion, communicates this acceptance to the institute, and the institute authorizes the company to register the medical device. Finally, within 30 business days from such authorization, the company files an application for registration of medical device directly to the healthcare authority, and the latter reviews the application in 5 business days, very shortly, and then issues the marketing authorization, enabling the circulation of medical device in Russia. That's all for the registration, but there are also amendments to the federal law on circulation of drugs, the main legal act regulating the circulation of medicines in Russia. These amendments have been published officially yesterday, but the majority of them will come into force only in autumn or even later. However, let's look at some of them in more detail. Absence of a drug in circulation in Russia for 3 or more years will not longer be the ground for cancellation of its registration. This is a good news for the companies that left the Russian market completely or suspended the supplies of certain drugs to Russia. No matter how long the drug is in shortage on the Russian market, its marketing authorization shall remain valid. So, should the company decide to renew the business in Russia or to restart the supplies, it will not be required to re-register the respective medicine. Further, the Ministry of Health will provide the Federal Service for Surveillance in Healthcare with detailed information from the registration dossier. The Service for Surveillance in Healthcare is the supervisory authority, while the Ministry of Health regulates the whole industry. And the point of this amendment is that the supervisory authority has not direct access to the information from the registration dossier. So, in practice, it asks the companies during the inspections to provide the respective information. And as you may guess, some companies refuse to provide this information, stating that they are not obliged to help the authority to perform its controlling functions. It significantly impedes the inspections, so the amendments provide the Service for Surveillance in Healthcare with the right to request information from the dossier directly from the Ministry of Health. The third amendment is the abandoning of mechanism of suspension of drug use. However, this amendment does not mean that the authorities will not stop the application of a drug in case of, for instance, some critical quality problems. It means that instead of referring to the suspension of a drug use mechanism, they will refer to the mechanism of limitation of drug use or the mechanism of suspension of marketing authorization. This mechanism, these institutes are envisaged by the laws of Eurasian Economic Union, and they actually give the same effect as the suspension of drug use. Further, the registration of the drug might be confirmed either by paper marketing authorization, as it is now, or by the information from the state register of drug, meaning the extraction from such register. The last amendment, but still important one, is changes in procedure of putting into circulation. This procedure will depend on the type of the drug, and some types of the drugs will be put into circulation without provision of any study or test results. Further, we will focus on some new labeling requirements and also cover some other legislative developments. As someone may know, Russia established some specific tracing requirements in relation to certain products that oblige companies to mark the product with data matrix code and further report the information about marked product to the reporting system. The example of data matrix code is presented on the slide. And initially, the tracing requirements were addressed to pharmaceutical companies, but as of today, some types of medical devices are also subject to mandatory labeling with data matrix code. And so this table shows what, when, in relation to what medical devices shall be done. Let's go through these rules very briefly. From 1st October of 2023, the medical devices from group 1 and 2 shall be labeled with data matrix code, and the information on putting them into circulation shall be reported to state monitoring system. The same obligations will come into force in relation to medical devices of group 3 from 1st March of 2024. Further, from 1st September of 2025, the information on circulation of medical devices from group 1 and group 3 shall be reported to state monitoring system. And finally, from 1st September of 2024, the information on termination of circulation of all devices from all these three groups, as well as information on circulation of medical devices from group 2, shall be reported to state monitoring system. In order to label the medical device with data matrix code, the company shall register in monitoring system and register its medical device in special catalog of the goods subject to labeling. The company may label the medical devices itself or involve service provider to do so. However, there are three important rules that shall be observed in any way. The devices manufactured in Russia shall be labeled before they are put on the market. If the device is manufactured in the Eurasian Economic Union, it shall be marked with data matrix code before moving of such device across the Russian border. And finally, if the device is manufactured outside of the Eurasian Economic Union, the data matrix code shall be put on the medical device before the device is subjected to the customs procedures of release for domestic consumption or re-import. Some other products, namely certain types of assistive devices, some cosmetics and household chemicals, might be labeled with data matrix code in experimental mode. The participation in such experiments is fully voluntary. However, many companies opt to participate in the experiments just to understand in advance how the labeling will work in practice, and usually the successful experiment results in the rules mandatory for the whole industry. The list of products that can be labeled with data matrix code within the experiments is provided on the slide. What we want to mention separately is that some legal acts and official recommendations that shall constitute the framework of the experiments are still missing, though we expect that they will be adopted in March or even in the February of this year. Another important amendment is the off-label prescription, the fact that meaning that the government regulated the off-label prescription of drugs. So the off-label drug use can be included in standards of medical care for children and in clinical recommendation if the drug is registered in Russia and meets one of two criteria. The first criteria is that the effectiveness and safety of off-label drug use shall be confirmed by data from scientific research or descriptions of clinical cases published in scientific publications from Russian Science Citation Index, from Scopus, or from Web of Science. Or alternatively, an indication of effectiveness and safety of off-label drug may be supported by recommendations adopted by the international professional organizations. Finally, returning to the experiments, there is also experiment on remote sale of prescription drugs. This experiment is limited to 3 regions of Russia, namely Moscow region, and Belgorod region. There is a list of international non-proprietary names of drugs that can be sold remotely within the experiment, and to join the experiments, the pharmacy shall have the integration with the state healthcare information system, equipment for storage and transportation of drugs, technical means for receipt of payment, and contract with aggregator, meaning the marketplace, if the pharmacy plans to sell the drugs via marketplace, not via its website. What is important is that the regions set their own requirements to the participants and to the procedure of the experiment. So before joining before joining the experiment, it is recommended to review the respective rules established on the local level. This is the end of our presentation, colleagues. We will be very glad to address your questions, if any. I think we're a little bit ahead of our schedule. So are there any questions? Just a second.
Go down in the chat.
Yes. Well, does the limitation, the labeling ahead of customs clearance, relates also to cosmetics or OTC products? Well, as per OTC products, as the OTC drugs, yes, there is a separate rules of their labeling with data matrix code, and whether it shall be made before customs clearance or after is subject to some additional to some conditions. We can go deeply in this question and revert to you additionally, but I'm not in position to provide you with this immediately. However, as per cosmetics, this is just the experiment for now, so there is no obligation to label all cosmetics with data matrix code before customs clearance, and when it shall be done, if you participate in the experiment, it will be stated in the additional recommendations and legal acts that shall be adopted, as I said, maybe in February or March, but as of today, there is no direct answer to this question. Well.
So, dear colleagues, after our presentation, you will be provided with a follow-up with our slides and the special questionnaire form that you will be able to fill in to leave your feedback, which is very valuable for us, and to leave certain questions if you don't have them now.